Get ready to be inspired. This week's message dives into Galatians chapter 4, verses 4 through 7, reminding us that some of God's greatest blessings come through patience. As we prepare for the Christmas season, Pastor Josh unpacks the powerful principle of guardianship and why trusting God's perfect timing is key to receiving his blessings. Settle in as we prepare to hear a special message from God.
Aristotle, one of my favorites, once stated, "Patience is bitter, but its fruit is sweet." And I want to talk about that patience tonight because I think it is incredibly important as we think through the coming of Jesus Christ and what it meant to us, what it means to the individuals that witnessed him coming in the flesh, and what it will mean to our children, Lord willing, as they grow up. There was an individual by the name of John Glenn who was the first American to orbit the earth. In fact, he orbited the earth 3 times in 1962, and he accomplished this incredible task during a time when individuals thought such a feat could never happen. In fact, the Soviet Union at the time were just as eager as the Americans or as the United States was to prove the world wrong, that there could be an individual to orbit the entire earth. Because of his accomplishment, he became a national hero, and he boarded Friendship 7 to demonstrate before the entire world that America's advancements into outer space were unparalleled and they were the world's best. Interestingly, at age 53, John Glenn was a U.S. Senator, and it wasn't until age 77, just for you all thinking you're too late in life, it was at the age of 77 that he boarded this aircraft, if you will, this ship, I don't know what you call it, this jet, I don't know what you want to call it, and he went up into space, 77 years old. But as we think through this American hero, who is often referred to as such, he didn't accomplish this by himself. In fact, as he was preparing to launch into outer space, there was a brilliant young African-American woman in the back office at 34 years old by the name of Calhoun Johnson. She was a brilliant mathematician, born in West Virginia, entered high school at age 10, finished at 14. I want to say that again. Entered high school at 10 years old. My son is 9. My daughter is 8. Bernice is 10. 10 years old. Could you imagine entering into Kayla, you're 13. Entering into high school at 10 years old, finishing at 14, entering college at 15, finishing at 18. Getting her PhD at 25, she was a mathematician. She was a prodigy. And at, I believe it was 35 years old, she became employed by NASA, where she led a variety of initiatives and accomplished much success. In 1961 to 63, she led the Mercury program, leading all of the calculations there and the trajectories for spaceships. In 1962, she led Friendship 7. In 1969, she led Apollo 11. And in 1970, she led Apollo 13. Her impact was very well known, obviously, throughout the various NASA missions. And many people felt that she was the secret to much of its success. In fact, as they were preparing for the Friendship 7, which is what she was most known for, they had these large computers that would generally calculate the equations and the coordinates for landing and for takeoff. And as advanced as this technology was, oftentimes the calculations could be computed wrong in the computer system. And so they would have these individuals who were very, very smart, very, very creative at coming up with solutions to check the numbers. And here it is, as Glenn is preparing for takeoff, the calculations are coming back incorrectly. And they are panicking because they don't know what to do, because all that they thought they had worked out are now, they're off. The numbers are off. He looks around, he says, "Get the girl being Calhoun Johnson. He says, "If she says they're good, then I'm ready to go." He gets in, she checks the numbers, and they're all ready to go. She launches off, or he launches off into space, comes back, circles 3 times, and everyone is singing his praises. And here's what interestingly happened after that accomplishment. No one really remembered the girl in the back office. No one brought her on the stage. No one announced what she'd accomplished. No one said anything about her. In fact, it was because of her race and her gender that she was never really mentioned in the success. It wasn't until November of 2015, after spending 33 years with NASA, that she actually received the due reward and the due acknowledgement for what she had accomplished. It was by Barack Obama, who brought her to the White House. And from that point, we became very, very well aware of Katherine Johnson, not necessarily by what Barack did, but by this very popular movie called Hidden Figures. Anybody ever seen that before? It was a very inspirational story, Hidden Figures. It was amazing. I loved every bit of it. But what I noticed in this text, and it made me contemplate in this story, how difficult it is to wait on things you know you're owed. And I want to talk about that this morning, waiting on things that you know will come, or you think, or at least feel very strongly will come, even if it takes a long time. I often thought about Katherine Johnson. In fact, this is my second time just going over this story. I prepared for something else early in the week, and I cannot get this young woman, she's not here with us any longer, but this lady out of my mind, because I thought through what she must have went through, seeing Glenn posted on all the posters, invited to the White House, walked along the streets as a national hero, never getting the reward, and saying to her in her mind to herself, one day people will acknowledge me for what I've done. One day someone will step up and say, oh, it was that young girl that went over the calculations that sent the man into outer space. 1 year passes, no one says anything, and maybe she remained optimistic. 5 years pass, 10 years pass, 20 years pass, 30 years pass, 33 years pass, and finally something happens. I want to ask you this morning, how many of us have been waiting on something for a long time that seems to never come through when you really need it? How many of us have been patient, waiting for things that we felt we were owed or we feel like we should have, and nothing really comes of it? James Allen once stated, patience is not simply the ability to wait, it's how we behave while we're waiting. I want to say that again because I think this will help my children out just a little bit. Patience is not simply the ability to wait, it's how we behave while we're waiting. Because essentially there are two different ways to wait. You can wait kicking and screaming, you can wait complaining, you can wait upset, disgruntled, impatient, or while you're waiting, you can allow that process to work out some things in your heart and your mind that will help you once you get where you're trying to go. The text we read this morning is hidden in the context of a biblical narrative that didn't start with this church in Galatia, but it actually started way back from the selection of Abraham. Abraham was the father of the nation of Israel, and he was the individual that God gave several promises that would last them a lifetime if they only obeyed. In fact, the whole point of them being freed from Egypt was to inherit promises. They were not just to leave just so that they could be free, but they were to leave so that they could be free, so that they could inherit something God had prepared for them. That thing that God wanted them to inherit was the promised land. Interestingly enough, they waited and waited and waited until God appointed the time for them to inherit. And while they waited, they didn't wait patiently. They complained the entire way through. And I want to say this to you. One of the things that upsets him the most, is not necessarily a lack of faith, not necessarily a lack of dissatisfaction. It is the prevalence, the prominence of complaining when we don't have a reason to complain. It is when we sit and we know God is faithful, and while we wait, like we are sometimes known to do, we complain about what we don't have, what we don't drive, what we don't wear, where we don't work, what we don't eat, who don't like us. We just complain the entire way through, knowing that a promise is on its way. Rather than waiting patiently, we complain. Well, Israel had a history of complaining. They not only complained through the wilderness, but after getting into the promised land, they were actually kicked out because of their lack of satisfaction for what God has done for them. And they found themselves in exile. It is a biblical principle going back to the Garden of Eden. You see, when God gives you land or give you something to inherit and you don't appreciate it, you typically lead yourself into sin. And whenever you're not appreciative and you find yourself sinning, then God takes away from you what he gave you so you can learn to appreciate what he gave you before. It's called exile. They were kicked out of the land. Now at this point, they're brought back into this land after the Babylonians had come and raided them, after the Greeks had come and raided them, the Assyrians raided them, and now they're back into their promised land, and they're waiting. They're waiting for God to rebuild the land the way it was before, kind of like this Garden of Eden. Could you imagine never worrying about what you need, what you want, never worrying about what you're going to eat, never worrying about what you're going to put on, always knowing that when a need is there, God will supply it because you're in relationship. And I want to put this at your front doorstep this morning. Just because you got saved, it doesn't mean you have to suffer through life. Will you go through persecution? Absolutely. Will people hate you? Absolutely. Will people not like you and appreciate you? Absolutely. But that doesn't mean that you have to live in lack and in want. The Bible shows us that people who are in relationship with God are always providentially taken care of because of not what we do, but because of the relationship that we share with him. So they go back to the land and they're building and they have oppression on every side, enemies on every side, and things are not going the way they thought it would go. And then God gives them this last prophet, if you will. The prophet is Malachi. They're building, waiting, wondering what's going to come of this venture back to the promised land. And this is what he tells them. Catch this. He says, remember to obey the law of Moses, my servant, all the decrees and regulations that I gave him on Mount Sinai for all Israel. Look, I am sending you the prophet Elijah. That's the hope right there, that one day this is all going to be cleared up. You're not going to suffer through this any longer. You just need to obey. And that dreadful day of the Lord will come where he will judge his enemies and those who are not in his family. His preaching will turn the hearts of his fathers to the children and the hearts of children to their fathers. Otherwise, this is the thing, if I don't do this, I will come and strike the land with a curse. And I can imagine they hear these words and everyone starts celebrating. Thank God there's an end to this nightmare. But this is what happens. It's that period between Matthew and Malachi that is known as the intertestamental period. Not 10 years, not 20, 30, 40, or even 100 years pass. 400 years pass, and God is nowhere to be found. Now, I'm going to tell you something, brothers and sisters. I can accept when things are not going my way because I'm being disobedient. I can accept when things are not going my way and I know I'm in the wrong and I know I've done things that I should be ashamed of and God is not satisfied with. I can accept that. What I wrestle with is when I am trying everything I know to do. And I'm believing God and I'm faithful and I'm serving and I'm giving and I'm doing all these things and it seems like God is always late. Have you ever been there before? Where you felt like the clock should have reached the time when it's my time and it's God's blessings over my life. I remember growing up, hearing people in church get up and we used to call it praise service back in the day. Y'all know what praise service is? It's when you jump up and you start telling a testimony. In the middle of service, I mean, people, there's no order at all. People just jump up and start talking about things God was doing, God had done in their life. And I remember hearing people say things like, I was sick and God healed my body. I was broke, money came to my mailbox. I didn't expect it, a check came. Y'all ever heard things like that? You know, just random stuff. And I remember sitting in church saying, God, ain't none of that stuff ever happened for me. I've been broke. Nobody ain't ever given me a dime. I mean, I had to find money under my car seat. And I used to always say, God, why aren't these things happening for me? Ever been there before? Seems like everyone around you, they're getting blessings. Everyone around you is getting a new job. Everyone around you is getting a new car, new house, a new love of their life or the first love, whatever the case is. You know, everyone is getting what they want and what they need, and you seem to be left out of everything. Here's Israel. The nations are soaring. Greece comes along. Rome comes along. They're soaring. And it's been 400 years and nothing has happened. By the time we get from Malachi to Matthew, which is the coming of Jesus Christ, there are all sorts of things happening. First, there's political strife. First, we see that the Greeks have come, but now Rome is in the picture. And they're devastating the nation of Israel in ways they never thought possible. They are literally dominating them by military force. Their philosophy was, we don't need to politicize our way to dominance. We just, with military force, we dominate our way to success. But then there's religious schisms. You have sects like Pharisees and Sadducees and Essenes and Zealots who all have different opinions about how they should live in a world of slavery. But there's this third one, which is probably the worst. It's the socioeconomic struggles that they all endured. You see, Rome was oppressive in that they applied a variety of taxes on nearly everything. All the Jews of the time were poor, sick, destitute. They were on the lowest part of the social class, and no one was there to really help them. In fact, if you look at Luke chapter 2, verse 29 through verse 32, you'll see some of the anticipation. There was a man there by the name of Simeon, and he was only living for one reason. The only reason he was living was so that he could witness the coming of the Messiah that would deliver them from their oppression. This is why it reads in Luke chapter 2, verse 29, Sovereign Lord, now let your servant die in peace, as you have promised. I have seen your salvation, which you have prepared for all people. He, that is Jesus Christ, is a light to reveal God to the nations, and he is the glory of your people, Israel. There was a woman there that saw, as Jesus was brought into the temple, she was a widow who had been widowed for a long, long time. Simeon is talking about what Jesus would be and mean to the people of Israel. And with Mary and Joseph, it shows that she began praising God as Simeon was talking to them. She talked about the child in Luke chapter 2, verse 38, to everyone who had been waiting expectantly for God to rescue Jerusalem. I want to talk to some people that's waiting for some things this morning. I'm talking about those things you've been waiting a long time for. And I want to put in our frame of mind this morning that this waiting is a process of God's moving in our life, because just as the nation of Israel had to wait to inherit the promised land, we too have to wait to inherit the things God has done for us. This is why Paul, when he's talking Galatians chapter 3, he's pulling from the theme of Exodus. He's using language that was familiar to them from the Old Testament. And he comes to two major points in chapter 3 and leading into chapter 4. The first thing is, when we were under the law, that guardian, that ordinance that Moses gave us, it was our time to prepare for the inheritance God had for us. In other words, the law was not the thing that brought us the inheritance. It was the thing that developed us for the inheritance. We often used it to celebrate who we were, but we didn't realize that that law was actually a guardian until God will bring to us the blessings of his son, Jesus Christ. This is why in Galatians chapter 3, verse 23 through verse 25, he says, before the way of faith in Christ was available to us, we were placed under guard by the law. The law was literally our babysitter, if you will. We were kept in protective custody, so to speak, until the way of faith was revealed. Let me put it another way, he says. The law was our guardian until Christ came. It protected us until we could be made right with God through faith. And now that the way of faith has come, we no longer need the law as our guardian. That's his first point. The second point he brings is that now that we've come to Christ, and now that we've been taken from the guardianship into a relationship with the Father, we now have a right to receive an inheritance. And this is the part where it gets very tricky for most Christians, because most Christians don't believe this. They believe they got saved so that they could be forgiven. I want to tell you, you got saved so you can receive something that God had prepared for you a long time ago. I want to say that one more time, because I don't feel like y'all with me this morning. I don't know if y'all had enough coffee, but this is what he said. Listen, we didn't get saved just to be forgiven of our sins. We got saved to receive something God had prepared for us before we were ever born. And I think a lot of Christians sleep on that, waiting on it, as if it's not something you can experience even here on earth. Here's my first principle I want to share with you, and this is the thing that is really powerful. It's the first principle. The only thing standing between where you are now and the moment you will receive everything God has prepared for you is time. The only thing between where you are now and where God is trying to take you is time. Let me prove that. Look at what it says in Galatians chapter 4, verse 4. But when the right time came, everyone say right time. When the right time came, that right time, that right word is, I meant to actually perform it before. It's a symbol of taking a container and filling it up to its brim. It's what happens whenever you are on an aircraft and they say, flight attendants come on the airline and they say, please make sure you're sitting in your right seat because we have a full flight today. It is whenever you have a capacity for a particular thing that has a limit, and that limit becomes full. And what we find is that all through Israel's history, yes, they could have had the Messiah come when they were in Egypt. Yes, they could have had the Messiah come whenever they were in the wilderness, but that was not the right time. He could have come hundreds of years earlier, but it wasn't the right time. He says, at the right time, God sent his son, born of a woman, subject to the law, and God sent him to buy our freedom. There's a Chinese proverb that says this: with time and patience, the mulberry leaves become satin. With time and patience, the mulberry leaves become satin. This is the proverb because in the natural state, a mulberry leaf is very rigid, it's very raw, it's very disgruntled, unrefined rather. It's very ugly. But over time and with process, it becomes satin. And that's how our lives are. It is the combination of patience and God's timing making everything beautiful. Here's the second principle I want to leave with you. Time spent under guardianship, whatever that may be. For some of us, we have financial goals going into the new year. We have health goals, familiar goals. Whatever your goal is, there's a rule attached to that goal. It may be saving more. It may be staying out of Amazon cart more. Y'all with me? I didn't offend anybody, did you? I went over. That was crossing the line, wasn't it? That was crossing the line. It may be staying out of the beauty shop. It may be not buying another pair of Jordans. It is the guardianship. It is the law. It is the rule that will prepare you for what you will inherit it, not because of what you implemented, but because of your discipline, the character you develop. Time spent under guardianship is not intended to be a time of it's intended to be a time of preparation, but for most people, it's a time of miserable desperation. And it's not intended to be that way. It's like, Lord, I want it, but I don't want to go through what I have to go through to get it. So it becomes miserable for me. What I want you to think of it as is it's what it takes to get where you want to be. I often tell my son, who loves to have a lot of fun, and I love him for it because he's a kid, and I love him being a kid. You know, you don't find many kids these days. You know, they're whatever. But I often tell him, in order to do what you want to do, you got to do what you don't want to do first. You got to do what you don't want to do in order to do what you want to do. It's being under law, learning obedience, learning submission. There were a few failures in life that happened that were tragic because they broke this rule. One of the things that we are very aware of is the Titanic. The Titanic was built in 1912. It was a British luxury ship. I think they spent $7 million or so back in 1900s, early 19, which was a lot of money back then. It's equivalent to about $198 million today on a ship. And we all know the story. They advertised it as the sinkless ship. Can't sink this bad boy because we put some time and energy and money into it. It's the height of luxury. It's the height of excellence. 1,500 passengers, get ready to have the time of your life. Well, we know the story. It didn't make it. And the reason it didn't make it is because of lack of preparation, lack of acknowledging the safety protocols, having the appropriate lifeboats, having all of these things out of place in order to meet a deadline. They skip steps. They skip steps. And I'm going to be honest with you because I'm a bit impatient in life. You see, my problem was growing up, trying to grow up too quickly. I wanted it all very quickly. I wanted it all right now. And I skipped steps in life that I wish I would have taken in order to get me where I wanted to be. I'm blessed, I'm thankful because God was merciful, but what I want to tell you is there's a better way. Not only did the Titanic suffer this sort of devastation, there's another thing called the Space Shuttle Challenger. 1986, it takes off to launch, and in 73 seconds, it explodes. Couldn't even get off the ground good. And the reason it exploded was because, again, they skipped safety protocols, they rushed deadlines, they didn't understand how to use the things on the spacecraft, and it, of course, exploded. Here's a tragedy. You see, sometimes in life, we can rush our way through life, and it doesn't cost us anything. That's the benefit of being young. You can just go through it and fail as much as you can as you're young. But there comes a point in life where your failures become devastating. Like this one, where over 30 people lost their life because they skipped steps. And here's my third principle, probably the most best one, or the most important one, excuse me. The worst blessings, I want you to hear this very clearly. The worst blessings are the blessed blessings, the best blessings before their time. Let me say that again. The worst blessings are the best blessings before their time. Can you look at your neighbor real quick and say, stop rushing God? Yeah, you got to stop rushing him. Because you can mess up a really good blessing begging for it before it is time. I'm not a baker or anything like that. My wife does great red velvet cakes. She's kind of almost taken her mom's place in the family baking the red velvet cakes. But I can tell you, I've had my share, not from anyone I know, of cutting into a nice, beautiful looking cake that when you open it up, that bad boy is undone. Amen. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Anybody ever been there before where it looked beautiful on the outside, you put the icing on the cake, it was shining, smelling good, and you're just proud, and then when you take it over, you open that cake up, and you got some problems. I think that's how we rush through life sometimes. We look good on the outside, we look shiny on the outside. In fact, we do all we can to prepare the look, but when we cut ourselves open, we cut that situation open, we find out we're undone on the inside. And it is because we rushed the process, we went ahead of God, and we took a good thing and it became a bad thing. You know what I learned in baking? I learned it by reading. I didn't do it, but what I learned is a difference of 2 or 3 minutes can ruin a good cake. Not 30, not 40. And what I want you to see there is you can wait a long time. Hear me. You can wait a long time and get right to the point and blow it with just a few seconds. Here's my last subpoint. Don't get distracted by excitement. Because you can smell the cake baking. You can taste the icing. It's just so beautiful. You can see that new job coming. You get overexcited and you blow it. I'll say this. How many of us knew you were getting a big paycheck? You know, overtime, Christmas holiday bonus, whatever it is. And because you were so excited, before you could even get the check, you had already spent it. You hear what I'm saying? It is being distracted by excitement. Here's what Paul is trying to get them to see in this text. He says, we've gone through our share. In fact, look at chapter 4, verse 1. I don't think I put it in the slide, but I want to read it for context's sake. He says, think of it this way. If a father dies and leaves an inheritance for his young children, those children are not much better off than slaves until they grow up. Most of the waiting process is about us growing up. This is why he says they're not much better than slaves, even though they're actually the owners of everything their father had. They have to obey their guardians until they reach whatever age their father set, and that's the way it was with us before Christ came. We were like children. We were slaves to the basic, look at this, the basic spiritual principles. Those basic spiritual principles are rulers that somehow affected what we did in the world. Principalities, forces like that took us out of good character. We were under those powers. But notice what he says. When the right time came, God did what? He sent his son, born of a woman, subject to the law, and God sent him to buy our freedom for us who were slaves to the law so that we could become adopted as his very own children. And because we are his children, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, prompting us, look at this, to call our Father Abba. That's an Aramaic word meaning papa, or as we say in America, dad. Meaning when you get on your knees to pray, because you have now entered into the time of God's blessing, you don't go to him as if he's a faraway master that you got to crawl to and beg for things. In fact, when you understand the time that you're living in and the blessings of this kingdom that we're a part of, you understand you have privilege, you have a right, you have an opportunity to go before God and approach him as the Father he really is because of Jesus Christ. I was literally praying about something yesterday. Had to attend an event and do something at an event. I'm going to be honest with you, the anxiety got the best of me. I'm sitting in my car, worrying about it, not to the point where I'm like going crazy, but I'm just, it's bothering me to the point it may affect the way I perform in this event. And I'm sitting there just thinking through it, and I'm saying, you know what? Let me just pray for a moment. Let me just talk to God about this. And literally in that car, I said, God, Father, you know I am very anxious about this. I'm actually very nervous about this. I'm not even going to hide this. I'm very nervous about this. I need you to just soothe my mind right now and just take away all of this anxiety. And right there in that moment, all of that anxiety went away. I went in there, and I'm not bragging, but I knocked it out of the park. All right? Let's not focus on that part, though. The point is, I was able to talk to my Father like the Father he really is. Y'all with me tonight? I went to him as Abba. He's my dad. He's my papa. And that's not disrespectful. That's relationship. He says, now you are no longer slave, but you're God's own child. And since you are his child, catch this, God has made you his heir. Here's what he said in chapter 3, verse 29. Now that you belong to Christ, you are the true children of Abraham. You are his heirs, and God's promise to Abraham, it belongs to you. God has something for you. That's what the coming of Jesus Christ meant to those who witnessed it. They anticipated the coming of the Messiah doing something not only spiritual, but tangible and eschatological, meaning it will bring an end to something so that something new could happen, and it will save them in a way that will allow them, their souls that is, save their souls so that they can prepare to receive something right here on earth that will allow God to glorify himself through them. They were to become the inheritors of the world in a very unusual way. And here's the thing. As believers, we don't seek monetary, material goods just to have them. We seek material things, whatever the success, whatever the goal is, so God could use us to glorify his name. If you want to be rich just to be rich, you probably will never be rich. I want to say that for a lot of people who want to be millionaires today. If you want to be rich just to be rich, you probably will never be rich. But if you want to be rich so you can help people, so you can be a blessing to somebody, you will never think about being rich. You will always think about being the blessing to others that God has called you to be. And because of that, you'll become rich. I can't even say that again. Y'all get the point? All right. Let me tell you a story and I'll be done. I was sitting across the table from one of South Carolina's only billionaires. Flies way under the radar. Has $1 billion company. And I was able to sit across the table with him to hear him talk to some students and give some advice. And the thing that he said that was very interesting about his success is he said, you know, money will do one or two things for you. It'll make you or it'll break you. It'll make you who you are supposed to be, or it'll keep you from becoming the person God created you to be. He says, so don't chase money. He says, I'm thankful that at the young age, I was able to tap into some of the greatest success stories in the world to learn how people can help others by their wealth. And that's what drove my success. It was never about starting the biggest company, never about starting, the most successful business in South Carolina. It was always I want to help people, and I know it takes money to help people, so let's get all I can so I can be a blessing to somebody else. Inheritance. God prepared him for that. God gave him that because he understood the rule of guardianship. And may we today, as we think about what Christ has done for us in our soul and our spirit, maybe we prepare ourselves to be used in that way, because that's what the real meaning of Jesus' coming is all about. That's what it's about. Bringing those people who have nothing to offer and making them the light and salt of the world. That's the big story of Christmas. So, brothers and sisters, I hope you have a great holiday. I did this today because I won't be able to do it next week. But I hope you bear this in mind as we give and as we think about all these wonderful times we'll spend with family members. Let's remember Jesus came at the right time to create a people who would be used to glorify God through the presence of his Spirit in our lives. That's the greatest gift God could ever give us, and we thank God for it. Can we give God praise for his son, Jesus Christ, this morning?